Namaste and greetings. I, Reetlath, researcher at IMPRi, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRi Web Policy Talk. We're gathered today for a panel discussion on defense, foreign policy, and union budget 2025-26 as a part of IMPRI's sixth annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of union budget 2025-26. This discussion is organized by the Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, as a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk series. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Now, let me introduce the esteemed gathering. Our chair for the session is Dr. Simi Mehta ji, CEO and Editorial Director, IMPRI. We welcome you, ma'am. The distinguished panelists for the session are Professor Sangjukta Bhattacharya ji, retired professor, International Relations, Javadpur University, Kolkata, visiting professor, IMPRI. Major General Dr. P.K. Chakravarti ji, VMS retired, strategic thinker on security issues, visiting senior fellow, IMPRI. Professor Swaran Singh ji, Professor and Chairperson, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, New Delhi. Professor Prabir De ji, Professor, Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, RIS, New Delhi. Professor Annapurna Nautiyal ji, Vice Chancellor, Hemavati Nandan Bahuguna Gharwal University, Uttarakhand, and Professor Naval K. Paswan ji, Professor, Department of Peace and Conflict Studies and Management, Sikkim University. We look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Now, without any further ado, let's start the program. To begin, we have a brief presentation by Ms. Avi Sharma ji.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Good afternoon, everybody. So today I'm here. I'm a research intern at IMPRi, and I'm here for my presentation on the topic defense, the union budget for defense and foreign policy. So to begin with the same, the Union Budget 2025 and 26 demonstrates India's commitment to strengthening national security and international relations. So, as the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presented the budget, which includes key allocations and initiatives for the defense and foreign affairs sectors, the budget emphasizes defense modernization, self reliance, and support for ex servicemen, aligning with the vision of Viksit Bharat, Developed India by 2047. Ma'am, we stay on this slide, on the first one only. Yes, thank you. Moving towards the defense budget overview. The total allocation, the government has set aside rupees 6.81 lakh crore approximately for defense, marking an increase of 9.5% compared to the previous year's budget of rupees 6.22 lakh crore. This allocation constitutes about 13.45% of the total union budget, making it the largest share among all the ministries. Breaking down the allocations further, the capital expenditure, modernization, and procurement is set for rupees 1.8 lakh crore. The aircraft and aero engines for rupees 48,614 crore, and the naval fleet for rupees 24,390 crore. Other equipment for rupees 63,099 crores, and the revenue expenditure for salaries and maintenance included is for INR 4.7 lakh crore, research and development and indigenization for rupees 26,816.82 crores, and for the border infrastructure, rupees 7,146.50 crore. Moving on forward with the next slide. The key focus areas for this year's budget were modernization initiatives. So the budget emphasizes the modernization of the armed forces to address contemporary security challenges, particularly in light of tensions with neighboring countries like China. The Ministry of Defense has declared 2025 and 2026 as the year of reforms, aiming to streamline procurement processes and enhance efficiency in the military spending. The second point, which demonstrates the domestic procurement, a significant portion of the capital outlay will be directed towards domestic procurement, aligning with the government's Atmanirbhar Bharat, the Self-Reliant India initiative. About 75% of the modernization budget is expected to support local manufacturers. And the third point says that defense research and development. So the budget for Defense Research and Development Organization, the DRDO, has been increased to approximately 20, rupees 26,817 crore, aimed at fostering innovation and technological advancements in military capabilities. Moving on forward with the next slide. We have the key trends in defense budget allocation. So here I've presented two, one of them is a graph and one of them is a tabular format. So the current allocation represents a growth from previous years. So for instance, it is nearly 9% higher than last year's revised estimates. However, despite this increase, the defense spending as a percentage of GDP remains around 1.9%, which is, according to some analysts, which argue is insufficient given to India's strategic environment and military needs. And in contrast to prior budgets where capital expenditure was often lower, this year's focus on modernization reflects a shift towards addressing long-term military readiness rather than merely sustaining operational costs. Moving on forward with the next slide, I've given a graph for global comparisons. So as we can see, the defense spending landscape illustrates a stark contrast between major powers, with US leading significantly while China continues to expand its military capabilities rapidly, also through dual use of technology. India's position as the fourth largest spender highlights its commitment to enhancing military readiness and underscores the need for increased investment to effectively address its unique security challenges. This comparative analysis also emphasizes the importance of strategic planning and resource allocation in maintaining national security in an increasingly complex global environment. Moving to the next slide. Okay. Thank you. So, for this slide, the foreign policy budget allocation, moving towards the foreign policy budget allocations. So, the total allocation for the Ministry of External Affairs, the budget allocates rupees 20,516.61 crores to the Ministry of External Affairs for 2025 and 2026, which represents a 15.45% increase compared to the previous year. Although it is lower than both the budget estimates and revised estimates for 2024 and 2025, which was the previous year. The overseas development projects, a substantial portion of this budget, which is rupees 6,750 crore, is 20% more than the previous year, is earmarked specifically for funding development projects in other countries, particularly in India's immediate neighborhood. Focus on neighborhood first policy. So approximately 64% of the MEA scheme portfolio, which is around rupees 4,320 crore, is dedicated to initiatives aimed at India's neighboring countries, which includes a large infrastructure projects such as hydroelectric plants and roads, as well as smaller community development efforts. Moving on with the next slide on foreign policy budget estimates. So I've presented the data in a tabular format, and the key differences between the budget estimates and the revised estimates for the Ministry of External Affairs. So it goes as the overall allocation for MEA in 2025 and 2026 is significantly lower than the revised estimate for 2024 and 2025, as I've already mentioned, decreasing from rupees 25,277 crore to rupees 20,516 crores, indicating a reduction in available funds for foreign affairs initiatives. Secondly, the overseas development assistance, there's an increase in the allocation overseas development assistance from the revised estimates. Ma'am, I guess I've done this slide and then we moved on forward. Yes. Because I've already spoken about the ODA and the. It's okay, I'll just continue with the strategic implications. So, going forward with the strategic implications, so commitment to diplomatic reach by increasing financial support for development in neighboring countries and alignment with foreign policy goals, which includes fostering regional stability and cooperation. It also serves as India's strategic interest in South Asia, Thirdly, positive trend in engagement, signaling a proactive approach to international relations. Fourthly, challenges in funding. So, despite the positive trends, the challenges remain concerning for funding adequacy and resource allocation within the Ministry of External Affairs. And due to these challenges, this could potentially affect the execution of India's ambitious foreign policy initiatives. Moving on forward to the conclusion, strategic intent budgets reflect a dual focus. So, both the budgets, the defense budget and the foreign policy budget, have a dual focus of national security and global influence. And defense modernization is one of the main focuses of this year's defense budget, which is a commitment to technologically advanced and armed forces and Atmanirbharta. For foreign policy, the focus is dedication to neighborhood first policy with development assistance. And there have been challenges which include high pension salary costs, which can hinder defense capital acquisition, and for funding adequacy challenges, which impacts the foreign policy goals. Moving forward to the we have so the way forward is for defense, streamlining and acquisition procedures, and boosting the research and development investment, also including the private sector, and addressing pension and salary structural issues. For foreign policy, strategic allocation and effective fund utilization, and maximization of impact on regional stability. So the overall goal could be to balance defense modernization with proactive diplomacy for India's security and the global role. And with this, I would also like to quote our External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar: India getting world ready and the world getting India ready is definitely what we are heading towards. Ending my presentation, moving on to the next slide. I would now like to end my presentation by highlighting the motto of this year's budget 2025 and 26 by our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji: Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, and Sabka Prayas, which encapsulates a vision of inclusive development and collective effort for a Viksit Bharat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Avi, for your presentation. Proceeding further, it is my honor and privilege to invite Dr. Simi Mehta ji to start the program with the chair's opening remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Reet, and thank you very much, Avi. A very good afternoon, everyone. I am Simi Mehta, and today we will do a deep dive into the Union Budget of the Government of India for the financial year 25-26 and its implications for the defense and foreign policy of the country. This panel discussion is part of IMPRi's 6th annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of the Union Budget. So today we have a very distinguished panel who would be enlightening us with their expertise. I welcome and thank all the dignitaries on the panel for being with us today, and despite your hectic schedule. I also welcome everyone who are watching us live on various social media channels of IMPRi. So as the discussion has already proceeded, apart from the various facets, today's discussion would also zoom into the various budgetary allocations to the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of External Affairs, and understand how these earmarked funds actually is in the run-up to making India a $5 trillion economy at the earliest, and also a Viksit Bharat by 2047. Also, we'd be understanding how, through this discussion and the budget, how the government of India understands the foreign relations. So when we talk about foreign relations, like the last year, the focus of this year's budget also has been on India's immediate neighborhood, with Bhutan taking the highest share, and India's outreach to Eurasia and also Latin American countries through financial allocations have also increased, in fact, rather doubled. Furthermore, India has also demonstrated its strong willingness to increase its exports and also its export capacity. And there has been some encouraging signals already in this year's budget. So we'll be understanding these facts also. Furthermore, India's defense allocations have increased, as has been mentioned in the presentation, with the continued push for Make in India for the modernization of India's defense equipment. So without wasting much time, let us begin with the panel discussion. And I would like to invite Major General P.K. Chakravarti for his initial remarks. So over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Simi, for getting me on the program. All that I would say is that what you call, firstly, a few words about the defense budget. Now, defense and security are something, which really speaking, doesn't appeal to any economist. I've spoken to so many of them as important issues. Still, things keep coming back at you. So I would start with the first point. I saw the slide, the allocation of the defense budget, more than 80 billion. I don't know, I've got different figures, 78.7 billion, 79.18 billion. Obviously, the dollar value is changing, and so we can leave it at that, but definitely it's 6.81 lakh crores. The first point I want to stress upon, which was already stressed so well, it is about 1.9% of the GDP. Now, when we ask that defense should be at least, say somewhere around 3% of the GDP, it starts with one issue, that basically that unless you have modernization going along with reforms, the defense minister said this will be the year of reform. The first reform we need is in the way of defense procurement. I mean, so I've heard so many people in and out of service who are speaking about it, that we are not able to spend the money which is allotted because of our procedures. We can't have a procedure. Well, I'll just give you a small example. I received a challan for wrong parking. It is so difficult to pay it online or offline. Now, we can't have such procedures going on. It was just 500 rupees. But believe me, finally we could pay it, but still we have to get the receipt. I'm just giving you how difficult it is today to get the money and then not be able to spend it. And the second is, what is the need for more money? So there has to be a change, which is apart from all these big announcements, big figures, and other things, that our approach to a problem must take into issues which affect the defense forces. That is, we are interested in getting the weapon on ground. And to get that weapon on ground, no manufacturer, whether he's the own manufacturer or from outside, will give it to you unless you give an order. And that order has to come. And that order has to be executed. And this does not involve purely the armed forces. It involves a whole of government approach. So this is the first point I want to flag. Now, when you say that the defense forces are not necessarily something which leads to economic growth, look at our exports today. Our defense exports are something to be believed incredible. It's almost, what I have as per reports is $2.39 billion. Now, imagine a weapon like BrahMos already sold to Philippines, possibly being sold to Indonesia, maybe to Vietnam. Pinaka already sold to Armenia, maybe sold to many other countries. The advanced towed artillery gun, likely to be exported. It is just being inducted into the Indian Army. So if we can go in for more privatization and give a level playing field, which is still to be given. As I said, a level playing field doesn't mean that you just say, okay, this police has given this many challans this year. How many are paying back? And I was told by many people, why do you want to pay back? Even if you don't pay, it makes no difference. This is what even the police are saying. Now, that is what is the reality of having these discussions, of understanding why we need the defense, this thing, and what you call, why is it needed for us to continue in the issue of more allocation, a better system of reforms to ensure expenditure takes place. All the figures have been given to you, but I seriously would like to put a few issues for your consideration. The pension budget, I mean, so I have raised it even last time, certain things. Now, we do not project anywhere, and then the US doesn't include the pension budget. I mean, so many countries just don't include the pension budget in the defense budget. Pensions are, after all, we are citizens of the country. pensions, ECHS, these can be dealt from other sources. And they, by no means should we get across this idea that the highest allotment is made to defense. Now, when you come down to the fine figures, please go into what allotment has been made for whom and how is it what you call, all right, this thing is taking place. And you will realize that as far as the defense is concerned, the actual things coming down are basically so little that you are not able to do things unless the government interferes and gives you additional allocation. And you may have to go in for what you call issues which are well beyond your capability, for which the government has already said that they would always help you. Now, I want to bring in a few things which are very good. Firstly, the IDEX. I think this is a great thing that is happening, that is allowing the entrepreneurs to make more and more inroads into our system. The IDEX is such that even artificial intelligence, which today China has demonstrated very successfully that it need not be a high-end expenditure, is possibly going to enter our defense forces. And we should pay more attention to it, particularly things like artificial intelligence, quantum computation, quantum communications. These must enter our era of warfare. The DRDO gets a lot of money, but at the same time, it is the private sector which must come in. After all, when you look at the United States, they've got one army lab, they've got one naval lab, and they've got one air force lab. But bulk of them ultimately give it to Lockheed Martin, or they give it to Raytheon, or they give it to Boeing. And these are the companies that are taking it forward. Unless we get the private sector into it, unless we get into issues where we can actually continue and establish our supremacy, we will not find our way forward. Another thing I would say, it's nice to have your own weapons, but provided you can provide them in time. Let's take the Tejas aircraft. I mean, I don't have to go into it. Orders placed, everything placed, but still not in a process to give it, because again, the engines have not yet come. I'm just giving you for the Tejas Mark II. 2 squadrons have come till today. I mean, just look at it, and we need much more. Similarly, when we look at the army, there are so many issues that the inventory is so large, it's impossible to flag all issues in the beginning. What do we do then in such a thing? We do what we do on any time I drive from Gurgaon to Delhi. You innovate. You innovate how do you tackle somebody coming from the wrong side. You innovate how you come across a jam. That means these are issues which are out of the textbook. And this innovation process is what possibly everybody in the defense has to realize. There is no way in which we can have one set of solutions. It's not a classical solution, to defense problems. A very dynamic world where so many things are happening at one time. You look at today, you've got the Hamas problem still going on. You have Iran today forming I've just read a new term, axis of upheaval. All right, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and China. I'm just giving. You have today a problem which is going on still in Ukraine. And you have today 104 or 105 Indians being bought in a military aircraft. I repeat, a military aircraft to Amritsar. These are all dynamic issues which the armed forces have to respond, and which cannot be figured out, which cannot be spoken. I just heard the foreign minister make a statement on this 104 people. But please understand that anytime a military aircraft comes in, the military gets involved. The next thing I want to clearly say, border roads. I must say, compliment the government that they have given a lot more than what used to be given. And a lot of roads are coming up, which is definitely making the situation easier for us to defend the country. I hope certainly that we take into account all this, and we also open the civil communications. It's great to see one project which I've been seeing in my entire service, the railway line right up to Baramulla from Patra has been commissioned, and hopefully civilian travel will start. Now, when you say civilian travel, please also understand that all military personnel who are exiting J&K are today either exiting through army couriers. Few of them can afford to fly. Otherwise, the leave process involves the use of the national highway, which gets them right up to Jammu. So such projects help in defense modernization, I'll put it. Because if these personnel have to get moving, that itself modernizes the whole issue. The next thing which I would like to point out is that the defense budget does include, luckily, the Indian Coast Guard and the border roads, and both have been contributing a lot. The DRDO's contribution will improve provided they get into with more and more with the private sector and give the private sector a better way. I named 3 weapon systems, and these 3 weapon systems are all with the private sector coming in and chipping in a big way. The BrahMos also, though, is, remind you, a private sector company under the government of India, which is very, very an innovative issue which President Abdul Kalam had thought about. And today, the BrahMos has about 160 private companies along with it. The last point which I would like to bring about is our civil-military fusion, which is very important in this budget. You can allocate any budget. Ultimately, the budget has to be spent and it involves sanction by the Cabinet Committee on Security. Unless there's nothing, there's hardly any small deals. All deals are big deals. They are in thousands. Military equipment is extremely expensive. Whether you want an aircraft, whether you want a tank, whether you want an artillery gun, whether you want rockets. So if you have a long procedure, believe me, if you read that even the latest acquisition procedure, it's so complex, so cumbersome, and so difficult. And lastly, the amount of time it takes from the time the GSQR is made till the time a contract is signed and finally the equipment is inducted. It goes on to almost 3 to 5 years. That means whatever you put in the budget today, it will be about 3 to 5 years before you can actually get on to it. That's all I've got to say in this short thing. If there are any questions, I can definitely answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for highlighting very important issues, and especially the need to focus on the emerging technologies. That is very important, and we need to have greater attention towards it. And of course, the bureaucratic hurdles. All the departments, all the ministries, I would say, go through this trouble. So thank you very much for your comments. So next, I'd like to invite Professor Annapurna Nautiyal for her remarks, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Simi. And at the outset, I would like to thank Director of IMPRi, Dr. Arjun Kumar, and to Dr. Simi Mehta, and all the panelists. And I'm very happy to see 2 of my dear friends, Sanjukta ji and Swarna ji, after such a long time. And after hearing Major General Chakravarti, many issues of defense have become very clear. And it's very true that there are some problems, or maybe we can say there are many problems, but even then we have to think about the solutions and also about the way forward, that how we can get through all these things and also achieve the target of foreign policy. Foreign policy and defense, they go hand in hand, and they are complementary to each other, not opposite to each other. And because when we talk about foreign policy, we definitely look into the factor that we have to have sovereignty, we have to have territory, we have to have population, and we have to have a government. So the defense and the foreign policy, they work for these 4 aspects, and they want to make them secure. It is very important for us, like Chakravarti ji talked about, that the Indians were deported, illegal immigrants from US were deported in a military plane. So this is our population, and it is our duty to protect such kind of population, because even then they have gone to US illegally, but after all, they are Indian citizens. So there are so many aspects of foreign policy which are interconnected with the defense. Like he talked about the defense budget in detail, and I would also like to say that India aims to accelerate its growth at the present time, which is very turbulent. And this growth will be led by employment. And there are key sectors which have been highlighted by our finance minister, like we want to develop through agriculture, through industry, through health, through education, through rural development, through tourism, hospitality, and exports. And most importantly, through infrastructural development, about General Chakravarti also talked. So for this, our Prime Minister, he spoke very clearly that we need innovation, we need inclusive development, and we need information. And to integrate these three aspects, we are into AI, we are into machine learning, we are into robotics, we are into cyber technologies and space technologies, which are very crucial to the future needs of India's defense as well as foreign policy. He talked about IDEX, and I think it's a wonderful initiative because it allows R&D in defense, which is very important. Because if we try to make it in India, like our Prime Minister always says, that you have to make in India, you have to make for India, because then only India can become great. We have to see his dream through his eyes that he wants to make India Viksit Bharat by 2047. And the goal of the 5 trillion or 7 trillion economy, they want to achieve in 2030. And it will not be surprising that if all efforts are put together, the economy can go to that direction also. Our foreign minister also talks about foreign policy when he says that our foreign policy is based on mutual interest, because the interest govern the foreign policy, and mutual respect, which is necessary, and resilient society or resilience. And through these things, we can also make India or Bharat an important stakeholder in global politics and in the context of foreign policy. So this slide was obvious about the defense budget. This slide was obvious about the allocations, but the highlights of India's foreign policy, like we are talking about neighborhood first. And this is not a new policy. Prime Minister Modi made it a compulsion that we have to see our neighbors first and then we go to other places. So that's how Bhutan is the largest recipient of the grant. Maldives is also there. Sri Lanka is also there. Nepal is also there. Even Afghanistan is there, but the aid has been decreased. And we are also going towards Africa, South Africa and other countries to give them aid. So this aid politics is very helpful. And on the other hand, if we see the word politics, we see that the United States of America has withdrawn all the aids. US aid has been stopped to various countries. And these countries are of global south, or the countries which need it more for their immediate requirements. So on the one hand, we have a global power. We say that the world has become multipolar, but I find it that it is still unipolar, because it is being directed by the whims and fancy of only one person, and that is the US President, Donald Trump. Any country who is refusing to obey his directions, these sanctions are being imposed. Like 25% sanctions on Mexico, Canada, and other countries, despite the fact that they are doing whatever they are required to do, like border patrolling and also the sale of illegal drugs like fentanyl or the illegal immigrants. So they are doing it. Even China has also not been spared. China has also been levied 10% because of this. So this is an era where we have to see that the economics is driving the international relations. And politics is also, of course, there, because without politics, economics can also not survive. So every day there is a claim. Sometimes the claim is that we will snatch Panama, we will snatch Panama Canal, or we will snatch Greenland, we will own the Gaza Strip. And the other, on the other hand, there are other things which the US wants to do. So in this kind of a world where uncertainties are immense, what India will do? So this is very, very important that India is investing in the border security, infrastructure, military training facilities, and preparing the army for future wars. Because there would be wars, of course, if this kind of trend goes on, and we have to be prepared for this. I liked one of the very, very important comment by Chakravarti ji, that you give the budget, but the budget remains unspent. So this is not only about the defense sector, but in each and every sector we find it. That even for the educational institutions, like we are centrally funded universities. Of course, I am not the vice chancellor now. I have become former. So, but I know that that the union budget provides funds to the universities. So the budget is not used by the universities. It is not that the government is not doing, government is not giving, but there are some kind of hurdles within the system or within the other areas. Like it is mandatory to purchase through GEM, that is government electronic market. And sometimes you do not get those things in that market. So the budget remains unused and it goes back, and then you are considered defaulter. So same happens in the defense sector also. Now, if we talk about union budget once again, then I think India has always said, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, that we would like to make in India. We would like to make for India. And he has always invited investors. That's how we see that there are so many investors summit which go on. And these private investors are, if they invest into India, but if the difficulties are not reduced, they will be discouraged. So this is very important for the foreign policy also to look into this direction, that how the private players can come into this area and also prepare for India, so that the dream of a Viksit Bharat by 2047 can be completed. And this is very interesting that on the lines of India, America also says that make America great again, mega. Europe also says that make Europe great again. So this is very exemplary that India is providing a leadership role to the world. Even if today President Trump is calling the shots, but Indian philosophy, Indian theories, and Indian campaigns are being noticed throughout the world, worldwide. And in view of the various issues, now India is diversifying. India is not dependent in only one country like it was during the Cold War, but now India is diversifying according to the national interest. Like we keep on buying oil from Russia during the Ukraine war. India was criticized, but India was looking after its national interest of protecting sovereignty, territory, population, and government. And still, India is doing the same, that it is working for the protection of its national interest. And I think that is the biggest goal. So even if there are tariffs, like in India also 2.88% tariffs have been imposed on all the goods, although the trade between India and the US is not that great. But even then, in this transactional scenario, the economies are highly integrated now, because it's a globalized world. And every country has some kind of relationship, economic relationship with the other country. So this is going to affect everyone, every state. And President Trump sees tariffs as the best example of using the power of economy. He wants to use economic force rather than military force. Military force will come later on, like the Indians were deported through the military planes. But economic sanctions will be the first idea. So this is also indicating that now we cannot talk more about soft power, but we have to talk about hard power. Because if you see Trump's policies, he believes in bargain, not in bargain. Nothing is, he is not bargaining with anyone. If any country is opposing, he's just imposing penalty, like you would have seen the Colombian response, and immediately Colombian they had to backtrack. So this is going everywhere. So US is withdrawing from every organization where where the United States has to pay, like US aid, like UNHR, like UNESCO, UNRWA, all the organizations, because they feel that these organizations, they have a biased attitude towards America. So the make in America, or make for America, or make America great again is aligned with the foreign policy of America, like India has aligned these goals with its foreign policy, and defense is supporting it. So today it's very difficult to go forward, because if, like, taking example from US only, like if the countries bow down in response to Trump's threats, then it will give an occasion to Trump to celebrate that economic force is more important than the military force. Otherwise, the countries still believe that military force is very important. So US is also working for its foreign policy only. So I have to say that this applies to India also. And in our budget, there are provisions for defense and to meeting challenges in and around India and outside. But the challenges, particularly, there are challenges from China, from US, from technology, from AI, and all these. So these in view of these, the budget allocation seems less, and this was indicated in your PowerPoint presentation also. So I would like to see that India, the current scenario also indicates that despite multipolarity, the world is still unipolar, and which aims to fulfill its foreign policy goals through mutual respect, interest, and resilience. This India wants. But what the other countries think is still to be probed. So India would have to have portable strategies to overcome various challenges. All challenges like socio-economic, humanitarian challenges, national security, military challenges, through wise diplomacy and its own strategies, for which India is known very perfectly. So I think I'll finish by saying so, and I look towards others. Yes, I would also like to say one more word, that the US is using all the techniques, like on Colombia, it has imposed DEFCON 1, that is the highest threat from any terrorist organization. So which is not required, because Colombia is not a terrorist. So this kind of unpredictable behavior we can expect anytime. So Indian foreign policy needs to be prepared for that, and our defense needs to support the foreign policy aims in a very positive manner. So thank you very much for giving me this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for highlighting the importance of defense and the role of defense and foreign policy in securing the sovereignty of the country, and for the importance of being prepared towards safeguarding it. That is very interesting, and thank you for bringing it out. So next, I'd like to invite Professor Naval Paswan. Sir, if you are ready. There's something that is blocking the camera, sir. If you could just see to it. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Audible. Good afternoon, and please.
Good afternoon to all of you and distinguished panelists and various participants from outside the panelists. So thanks to the chair for giving me this opportunity to share my views on a very pertinent and important topic, that is defense, foreign policy and Union Budget 25-26. And being a scholar of international economics, this is very much fitting into my knowledge domain. Since you have already given background about the allocation of funds to the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Defense, which makes us easy to understand the allocation of budget. But I will repeat some of the things which is already said by Professor Notial and Major General Dr. Chaudhary. So since the Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable which amounts to 13.4% of the budget and below 2% of the total GDP of economy. So there is a marginal increase from last year, and this increase is necessary for our defense sector because we are further ramping up the defense capability with a state-of-art weapons and ensure transformation to a technology-advanced combat-ready defense forces. So this is the necessity for us to allocate little more budget to the Ministry of Defense, and there are many other things department has to do under the Ministry of Defense. So one side, defense provision has been made in pursuance of the Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi led government vision of Viksit Bharat at 2047 with technologically advanced and Atmanirbhar armed forces. This is one side, but another side is also that the Ministry of Defense has already taken a decision to observe 2025-26 as year of reforms, which will further strengthen the resolve of the government for armed forces modernization and aims to simplify the defense acquisition procedure DAP 2020 to ensure the optimal utilization of the budgetary location. So I was finance officer of Central University of Sikkim, and I know it is very, very difficult for us to monitor and observe that which department utilization is less. So we are sending letters at least twice in a month to monitor the percentage of utilization from the department where we have already allocated funds. And this ministry is also not an exception, which is already highlighted by Professor Notial. So now the situation is rupees 12,500 crore they have to return due to unspent fund. So the Defense Ministry is expected to return 12,500 crore from Main reason for this underutilization of fund is the slow and complex defense procurement process, which cause delay. So the emphasis has already been given in 25-26 budget is to make simplify the procurement process. So to streamline procurement, the government had started consolidated capital expenditure for the three armed services under a single framework. And this unified approach aims to cut down on redundancy and boost efficiency in acquiring critical assets like land, aircraft, aero engines, and heavy vehicles. So these are the reforms taking place within the defense industry, and government is also watching it. In the current geopolitical scenario, where the world is witnessing a changing paradigm of modern warfare, Indian armed forces need to be equipped with a state-of-the-art weapon and have to be transformed into a technologically advanced combat-ready force. Keeping this in view, rupees 1,80,000 crore has been allocated on capital outlay of the defense forces, and this allocation is 4.65% higher than the budgetary estimate of financial year 24-25. During financial year 2021, Ministry of Defense took a decision to strengthen the domestic industry and to take the forces self-reliant. Since then, a substantial share of modernization budget is being earmarked for the capital procurement from the domestic industry, and in order to encourage the private sector for manufacturing and technological development in the defense sector, a notable percentage of the domestic share is further earmarked for acquisition from domestic private industry. And when you go to the bordering area of India, we are fully well-equipped, technologically advanced weapons are there, and these are the process through we produce and we encourage the private sector for manufacturing sector. So there is a substantial enhancement in the allocation for DRDO, and DRDO has been increased to 26,816 crore in financial year 25-26 as compared to last year that was 23.85 crore, which is 12.4% higher than the budget estimates of 24-25. So out of this, a major share has been allocated for capital expenditure and to fund the research and development projects. This will financially strengthen the DRDO in developing new technology with a special focus on fundamental research and hand-holding of the private parties through development come production partner. This will also increase allocation under capital head of DRDO for further provide adequate financial resources development fund and will assist the development of deep technology in the defense sector. So DRDO has also got boost through this budget, and there is also a provision of encouraging a startup ecosystem for innovation in the defense sector and for making the armed forces self-reliant in defense technology and increasing innovations. It is imperative to engage the private players and strengthen the startup ecosystem in the country for technological development and innovation in the defense sector. And for this purpose, 449 crore has been allocated to IDX scheme, including its server scheme, that is Aditi, that will be utilized for funding the projects to be taken up under this scheme. Government has This, but a strengthening border infrastructure is also a requirement for our defense sector. And when you go to the border area, it is visible that the level of development is taking place at the border infrastructure is commendable, and budget allocation has been also be given for border infrastructure 71246 crores. Now, the geopolitical security is undergoing a turbulent phase, and areas like hypersonic weapons, anti-drone systems, and quantum tech are crucial technology for adding advancement in security infrastructure, and budget has already been allocated to this area. So considering the delicate tectonic plates of global security and the imperative needs to bridge capability gaps, most defense analysts have also argued that Indian defense budget should be at least 2.5% of the GDP, and we hope that by next year this budget will increase. Now we are talking about the MEA budget, and MEA budget is basically devoted for foreign aid and assistance, and focus of this 25-26 budget has been given where you need some infrastructure development projects, then hydropower development projects, and also economic collaboration and partnership. So when we talk about the allocation of budget funds in the Ministry of External Affairs budget, then we find that Bangladesh no any increase in the aid, but for Maldives, India's financial support to Maldives has been from rupees 200 crore in the 24-25 financial year to rupees 100 crore in 25-26, and also reduction in Myanmar aid allocation. And as already highlighted by previous panelists, that Nepal aid remains unchanged at rupees 700 crore, Sri Lanka 300 crore.
I think that
Substantially, and continues to be India's largest foreign aid and recipient. But when we talk about near neighboring countries, Nepal and Bhutan were getting foreign aid and assistance since 1951. So this aid and assistance from India is not new, but the amount which is increased is substantial. And we also know that India has financed 5-year plan of Bhutan for 3 decades. So we are on Bhutan is getting substantial amount of budget allocation as a foreign aid assistance. It requires some contribution. So these are the issues which I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for giving me.
Thank you very much, sir. And I sincerely hope that you will remain with us for the question and answer session.
Yes, I will try to join because I have to take Army officers class in the commando area. Thank you.
Sir,
Thank you very much.
Maybe we can, I would just want to know your thoughts about, since you are in Sikkim and you are very intensely active in conducting research and fieldwork in the northeastern states, do you think our budget augurs well for the Act East policy?
When we are talking about the neighborhood policy, Act East policy automatically comes in. And when I am traveling to the bordering area, particularly Myanmar, China, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, our infrastructure developments are far, far better than we have seen 20 years or 15 years back. Accessibility is very, very important for Northeastern people. And now they have accessibility wherever they want to go, they can go. But during these last few years, our defense forces has also brought many vehicles and many instruments or many technology, which is very helpful for us to guarding and monitoring the border. And infrastructure is already developed and it is already in the development process. Maybe within 4 or 5 years, our infrastructure at the border area will be very, very smooth and also convenient for the Northeast people to move out wherever they want to go. So it is for the both civilian as well as military purpose. Our infrastructure is developing at very, very fast level.
Thank you very much, sir, for your response. I would now like to invite Professor Prabir Dey for his presentation. So over to you.
Shall I go?
Yes, sir, you can choose to stay, please.
4:15 I will go. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Dey, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Simi and other panelists, co-panelists. I see our seniors, and I'm enriched by their very important observations on the budget and related topics. And nice to meet many, the new co-panelists like Major General Chakrabarti, Professor Nautiyal, and many others, those who have joined as an ordinary participant as well. Good to see Professor Saran Singh as usual, a motivator for all of us. Well, Dr. Arjun and Dr. Simi, I will, restrict myself to 5 to 10 minutes, and I'm not in Delhi. That could be an interruption because of Wi-Fi access. So I have a PowerPoint, and let me share for the presentation. Okay, yes. I think this is all visible, is it? Can you see my slides?
Oh, it is coming. It is coming. It will take.
It still says that it.
No, it's not coming.
Oh. I do not know. I mean, what
screen, but
can you show it from your end?
Sure.
Yes, we will share.
Well, what I have, done in my presentation, basically purely my own observations. Own observations. So these are my own personal views, nothing to do with my organization where I work. If you can, share the slides once again, that would be excellent. But let me start, the general sentiment, and I go by with the previous speakers. The general sentiment is first is that there is the aspiration of Vikshit Bharat. And by 2047, India aspires to be the developed country with the 30 trillion plus GDP. This is so whatever presented now, and if you go back to the previous presentations by the honorable finance ministers, these are purely, there is a link to each budget is going towards the Viksit Bharat. Particularly this year, union budget, talked more about the household consumptions and savings. So income tax exempted up to 1 lakh per month income. So I can tell you that, and like others, it's a people-friendly budget, lots of boost to the middle class, but depends on our expenditure, our demand pattern. Since the inflation is also going high, so how much one can buy, one can use within real effective income, that's also a matter of a question. But just I tell that this sentiment is that it's going to increase the household consumption and savings. Plus, this budget recognizes the 4 engines of development, very much linked with Viksit Bharat 2047, agricultural sector, MSME, investment and exports. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, and exports. And then there are multiple driving pillars. There are no point of repeating them, but some things which come my mind very clearly. That's very new in terms of Prime Minister Dhana Dhanya Krish Yojana. I do not know how many people will properly pronounce the Dhana Dhanya, but certainly it's going to help the people, in particular the farmers and the related activities. Plus, on connectivity front, modified Udan scheme, just an example. There's a new line of activities, particularly focusing Bihar, the research and development for the private sector, people-to-people linkages and health insurance for the gig workers. We know the gig workers, the kind of treatment they get. So health insurance, identity, a very, very, very innovative support. And plus, there are several others, in terms of our climate agenda, in terms of our maritime agenda, etc., etc. But 4 issues, and I go by the previous speakers as well, and people who will be speaking next to me, that the rising global uncertainties, those certainly not going to be, going to be taken care by the budget. Budget is purely for the domestic production. So, but something, we expect that uncertainty is going up. There are many complex scenario. So budget might help us to take care, rise above the challenges, those challenges. So I think there are little support. Plus, rising inflation worldwide, it is not an India specific. Energy security worldwide, the divided climate agenda. So these are some of the global aspects and global issues which are going to affect in India. Let me come to one by one the major, some of my own observations. Next slide, please. Yeah, the first one is that if you look at the numbers, the foreign affairs, which you call in India external affairs, is a mixed outcomes. Why? MEA's own allotment in the total budget is declining. It's not even 1%. In 2023-24, which is an actual budget number, it was 0.65 is the total allotment of the MEA's budget. MEA is basically it's not in the top 10 ministries that draw the money from the budget, basically. And it is declining, 0.65 to 0.41. So this is a matter of concern, MEA's workload is rising, our external affairs minister, out of 365 days, 300 days he has been traveling, and so also his team. With a small budget, how much one can do. But there's another point which previous speaker said, that the foreign nations, those who depend on us, their allotment has increased in 2025 and 26. So can you go the next slide, please? The next slide tells you the allotment. And no point of comparing what was the last year, what is this year, The thing is that the Bhutan, for right reason, they're picking up the bulk amount, and because we get very good quality green energy from them, and certainly it is our duty to support the Bhutan, the Himalayan kingdom, for their prosperity. This is the excellent allotment. Plus, India slowly, in terms of infrastructure projects, energy project, transmission lines, housing, roads, bridges, integrated checkposts in the neighborhood, those India, India believes in step by step, unlike China, we go very steady, small but steady, In that way, I think 4,320 crores, 65% of the portfolio, actually devoted to the neighborhood. So neighborhood comes very much in the radar of the current government, current budget. One point which I'm also very impressed that Chabahar Port, continues to get the same allotment that it used to be earlier. Chabahar links strategic connection with Central Asia. So second observation, India's allotment to the foreign nation increase and the neighborhood gets the chunk of it. Next, please. Third observation for me is that if you come out of the foreign to the commerce and industry, international commerce and international industry, international trade, India's export target by 2030 is the 2 trillion. Current our export in the goods is 778, goods and services is 778 billion. We're going to be a 2 trillion exports, goods and services by 2030 to support, to achieve that milestone or target. Export capacity, export promotions, those need to be, supported, and in a very collective manner, not in piecemeal. So I found this time, couple of things like Bharat Trade Net, BTN, those who are dealing with international trade, exporters, importers, they know how important it is, It is a fantastic project. Government has allotted, see the number, 2,250 crore for setting up a DPI, digital public infrastructure. So this is actually going to be a game changer for international trade transaction purposes. And plus other, export capacity, etc., supporting MSMEs. Last observation from that, our value chain is rising, our exports is rising, our imports is rising much faster than exports. That imports feeding into our global exports. So we have to tally our duty structure at par with an ASEAN, because we import lots from ASEAN products or services, the parts and components to our global exports. So 10.66% is our average custom duty. This year, this budget has seen lots of slashing, rationalization of basic customs duty, by the way. Next slide, please. So I was talking about the rationalization of customs duty, no point of repeating line by line. What I see, because of rationalization, when you talk about inverted duty structure, that is going to be corrected. When you talk about a GVC, you cannot do everything in this world. It is Indian Railway used to do 20 years back everything for the construction, but you realize how bad the Indian Railway is. It's a good moving Indian Army from one place to another, but it is equally bad in terms of serving on time. But we have changed it. So how this has happened? Because the parts and components for the railways actually came through the value chain that we created between India and many other countries. So I think because of the rationalization of customs duty, the value chain like LED TV, mobile phone, EV, semiconductors will get priority. Point number 5, next please. Next slide, yeah. The one which is missed with the previous budgets, it is that maritime capacity. And I see that this is the first time Government of India has set up a maritime development fund of 25,000 crore for the information of the co-panelists. We do not have any container vessels, any cargo vessels, large serving India to others, which is in compliance with the International Maritime Organization environmental free conditions. So green shipping is kind of things that we have to do by 2030. So we do not have. So Maritime Development Fund is going to support shipbuilding and there are other assistance. Please, next. Next, please. And so also the change in custom duty in the critical minerals. If we talk about the semiconductor, we need many important feedstocks, critical minerals. But today, the difference is between those who should be importing, like copper, brass, lead, and zinc scraps, or something like lithium-ion battery for cobalt for the semiconductor, your mobile phone, or anything that we do, all the duty structure need to be rationalized, and most of them in the critical minerals have been removed. That's a good development. Next, please. This is the last slide, point number 7, which are the takeaways. The one point is that this is the budget for the mass people. There's no doubt about it. Consumption and savings likely to go up. I expect more consumption, not in the savings. More consumptions will have a cyclical effect. Second is, several new initiatives not there earlier, supporting our Vikshit Bharat journey. Point number 3, the key outcomes are relating to neighborhood relations. 64% of the allotment is basically serving our neighborhood. Excellent job. Excellent move. Maritime capacity building, logistics, economic security, GVCs, export capacity. So these are the things which cannot be made by a one budget. But going towards 2047, I hope these are going to get more and more momentum in coming years. Point number 4, which is very unique, that export expansion and capacity, which first time I see, kind of a maritime development fund, kind of an export capacity, and export incentive projects. Point number 5, which is I'm very worried, I work within government organization, but even then, allow me to say this, if you're in MEA is going to take care of the big global challenges, MEA's budget is really not very much in a healthy sign. We need to support an MEA. We need to increase our diplomatic power rising, and to have more support, financial support means, there will be more motivations coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Dey, for a very, very informative presentation. And I know you are hard pressed on time. So before you leave, I would want to ask you a question. In fact, Professor Annapurna Nautiyal, she alluded in her presentation that that economics is driving the international relations today, given the prevailing uncertainties. So from there, I would like to take it forward that the tariff imposition by Donald Trump has reignited the concerns about India's exports, and such speculations have actually resulted in record lows for the Indian rupees vis-a-vis the US dollar. So what do you think about it? Does the budget provide any cushioning for such uncertainties? What are your thoughts?
Well, the budget, as such, you cannot relate, that one sovereign foreign nation has every right to increase its tariff structure as far as it is within the WTO. United States of America is still a member of the WTO. So they have to go by, their bound rate. And there is every logic that US president has to increase his tariff, as a tool to squeeze, some countries in return to something else. So far, there is nothing on India. And I'm sure, the governments, both the countries are in touch each other to gain, I'll say that India has every possibility to gain more from US, China, US, Mexico, and US, Canada, tariff war. That much I can tell. Some questions, I won't be able to answer, in a public forum like this. Is there any cushion? Of course, I said that budget is not linked with the tariff war. Budget is getting to support our MSMEs, our export capacity. And of course, we need to see in minute details. Some measures, some retaliations, those come at the time of war happens. So there is no such between India and US at the moment. That much I can tell. Sorry, this answer, Professor Saran Singh can give better articulation.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Very great segue into Professor Swaran Singh's presentation. Now, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Delighted to be once again with the IMPRi team. Thank you to Simi and Arjun, of course. And I heard Reet and Avi also spoke in the beginning. Delighted to be with General Chakrabarti, Professor Nautiyal, and my other colleagues. Prabir just finished his speaking. I think so much has already been talked about. about the budget, and we are looking today primarily on how defense and foreign policy budgets, what do they say, what do they tell us? If something distinguishes in clubbing defense and foreign policy or foreign ministry budget, then I think it is the projection of India. If we are clubbing together defense budget and MEA's, Ministry of External Affairs budget, to see what it tells us, this tells us India's strategic objectives in long term, where India or India's leadership wants to take India in coming decades. And then if you look at the way India is evolving, largest young population, largest democracy, largest population country, fastest growing among the major economies, all said to be fourth largest, and then of course later third largest economy, increasingly hub of modern technology, a unique country that can produce high technology at very, very cost-effective prices and implement it at enormous mass scales. These are things that make India's strategic projections interesting, not just for us in India, but I think around the world. And that is where clubbing together Ministry of Defense and Ministry of External Affairs and reading their future trajectories by looking at the budgetary analysis perhaps becomes an interesting exercise. Something that Praveer just mentioned before me is how MEA is funded overall, generally hovering around 1% of the federal budget, of the budget of Government of India. And that makes it very interesting to then see what it is trying to achieve. And what it has been able to achieve is fairly interesting in terms of its diplomatic visibility around the world, diplomatic footwork, diplomatic outreach, in terms of making that whole emerging India image. But also what I want to underline is the mention that General Chakrabarti made in the beginning, and of course many others also underlined, the utilization issue. I remember Professor Nautiyal also mentioned how even in education sector, the utilization of budget is as much a challenge as procuring larger sums of money for your particular sector or your particular institution. And therefore, utilization often leads to issues where Ministry of Defense is often seen not being able to spend large parts of defense allocations more often than not. Now, why I'm saying this? Because Ministry of External Affairs has had an excellent record in budget utilization, usually staying at 95, 96% or above in some years, which could partly be explained because they don't have high capital expenditure component in their budgets, just like Ministry of Defense would have a very large size of capital budget in capital expenditure budget for themselves. So in that sense, I think it's interesting to see the comparisons of Ministry of Defense receiving about 13 to 14% of federal budget compared to Ministry of External Affairs receiving only 1% of the federal budget. Makes an interesting comparison. But remember, what Ministry of Defense does, nobody else can do. How to ensure defense of India. And then it goes way beyond. And just from the conventional understanding of defense of India, it does a lot of internal security responsibilities. It also, for about 2-3 decades now, has enormous focus on HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief responsibilities. So Ministry of Defense goes out and does things that are not quintessential, typical defense in terms of conventional definition of responsibilities of Ministry of Defense. Now look at Ministry of External Affairs. The picture is completely reverse. Ministry of External Affairs usually lays out for us the broad bandwidth of do's and don'ts in terms of what is India's foreign policy vision. It explains it, it formulates that for us. But it is not the only ministry that conducts foreign policy. Allow me to say, and I'm sure Professor Nautiyal will vouch me, even each university has a little bit of foreign policy. Of course, every ministry has a foreign policy. There are sister cities. So in terms of implementation of foreign policy, there are many other actors involved, and you have to look at that budget as well, as to how that contributes in implementation of foreign policy. And of course, we all know that a certain critical part of foreign policy is also not just implemented, but even conceived of at Prime Minister's office or in the National Security Council Secretariat, or I would say Ministry of Trade and Commerce. So in that sense, that nuanced understanding of clubbing Ministry of Defense with Ministry of External Affairs is important before we start looking at what is the budget scenario for this year. I believe a lot has already been said on defense budget. So let me confine my comments to much more on Ministry of External Affairs as to how that ensures with a limited budget, enormous responsibility of a diplomatic outreach around the world to nearly 210 countries and territories with 190 plus missions around the world and so on. Now, it's important to see that when we look at the federal budget, the largest allocations, in fact, the entire revenue resources generated go to Ministry of Finance. So Ministry of Finance naturally becomes a ministry that is number one in terms of receiving those allocations, then of course disbursing those allocations. And so nominally, of course, the Ministry of Finance would be seen as a ministry that gets largest resources at its disposal. But in actual reality, of course, we all understand it is Ministry of Defense. So if we have total 19.4 lakh crore generation of revenue for this year, 6.8 lakh crore goes to Ministry of Defense. Now compare that Ministry of Defense 6.8 lakh crore to mere 20,000 crores. 6.8 lakh crores MOD, 20,000, of course it is 20,516 crores, mere 1% budget that goes to Ministry of External Affairs. And of course, as I mentioned, it doesn't have a heavy capital expenditure. Ministry of External Affairs expenditures are broadly seen in three categories. One is called central sector or discretionary expenditure, which is how footwork is done in utilizing that money. Second component is establishment, staff, salaries, cars, petrol, and so on, everyday expenditures that happen, establishment. And now remember, developmental partnerships is the main responsibility of Ministry of External Affairs, and therefore that is the third most important component of budgetary allocations. That does not happen in any other ministry. No other ministry gets a major chunk of its budget to build partnerships. They do build partnerships, but that's not the major responsibility. For Ministry of External Affairs, that's a major responsibility. So therefore, in this year, for example, 27% of that 1% of the federal budget that goes to Ministry of External Affairs, 27% of that is meant for developmental partnerships. Now, we also looked at in terms of trends of budgetary allocations. What made MEA draw enormous attention? See, normally all people, all of us, when we look at the budget, the first thing all of us want to look at is taxation. What is the new taxation structure? Then second thing we all want to look at is what are the major infrastructure, Gati Shakti related projects, because that affects everyday people. So we are looking at infrastructure. The third thing that usually draws attention of people when they're looking at India's budget is defense expenditure. What made Ministry of External Affairs budget look interesting last year, I'll come to this year later, is that for about 5-6 years, between 2017 to 2023, the annual budgetary increase of MEA, Ministry of External Affairs, were hovering around 4%, not even matching inflation. Remember last year, MEA received a 23% raise in their annual budget, which was very noticeable, partly because we were hosting, you remember, G20 summit meeting. So that was a major responsibility for Ministry of External Affairs. But that made headlines that Ministry of External Affairs was now receiving suddenly 23% raise in their annual budget. And by comparison, this year increase is impressive. If you look at, I said last 5 years, 4%. If you compare that to this year, 15.45%, then Ministry of External Affairs is drawing enough attention of national leaders. But because immediate preceding year, because of G20 summit meeting, received 23%, it looks like, oh, MEA is now getting less of a rise than it got last year. But if you look at the larger trend, I think it is showcasing that prioritizing of Ministry of External Affairs is right there. Nearly 16% raise in their annual budget. And something again which is very clear, which is persistent for several decades now and becoming increasingly much more visible. And I remember Simi asked question to Pravir about Look East policy, is the limited bandwidth of India's investment in building developmental partnerships. And I think that comes from the fact that, no giant can continue to rise and become effective unless it is able to handle pygmies around it. So we have to ensure we have borders that are safe, we have neighborhood that is friendly, and then make sure India rises. So therefore, there is nothing wrong when we see that major focus of MEA's developmental partnership investment related budget, which is aimed, of course, in building hydroelectric projects. You're hearing the one to be built in Northeast of a similar size that China is trying to build on Brahmaputra. So India is trying to build hydroelectric projects, power transmission lines, Bhutan and India, for example, housing in Maldives and Sri Lanka and so on, in building roads, building bridges and so on. So in immediate neighborhood, of course, with this gradual change in Bhutan's policy towards China, Bhutan continues to be traditionally, it's not now, traditionally Bhutan has been dependent enormously with the granting aids from India. So obviously for this year, once again, a large-sized allocation is made for Bhutan, 2,000 crore. Remember, 20,000 crore is MEA's budget. 2,000 crore is going only to Bhutan. 2,150 crore actually. Now, traditionally, this has always been the largest annual grant or budget of MEA's budget going to any neighboring country or any country. Cumulatively, you've heard of India investing $4 billion in Afghanistan, India now investing $4.5 billion in Sri Lanka. But annual allocations, Bhutan has always been number one. Now, if you compare this year's 2,150 crores for Bhutan, it definitely shows an improvement, a very interesting rise from 2,068 crore of last year budget allocations. But it is much smaller compared to the revised estimates. So one has to always look at what was the budgetary allocations and what were the revised estimates. So are your this year's allocations guided by last year's revised estimates? Not in this case. They are guided by last year's budgetary allocations. Budgetary allocations last year, 2,068 crore. Revised estimates of last year, 2,543 crore. This year's allocations for Bhutan, 2,150 crore. This year's most impressive raise in neighborhood goes to Maldives. Maldives has really drawn enormous attention. You remember President Moizu visited India. Indian foreign minister has been going to Maldives. So that smoothening of the relationship, which was becoming China-centric at some stage, and India out was becoming the slogan, has been attended to now by providing a major jump. Because here, 600 crores to Maldives are much, much higher even from the revised estimates of last year. The revised estimates of last year were 470 crore. This year, budgetary allocations are 600 crore. Last year's budgetary allocations were only 400 crore. Similarly, Sri Lanka, I mentioned $4.5 billion cumulatively post-economic crisis. But annual budgetary allocations of Ministry of External Affairs is a slight interesting increase from last year's budgetary allocations of 245 crore to 300 crore this year. Nepal is another, of course, that has been interesting. I think earlier that figure was mentioned by Praveer of about 700 crore to Nepal. But India is now becoming global in that sense. So what are we doing at global level? Praveer mentioned about Chabahar. But remember, President Donald Trump is now threatening to, do away with the waivers that were given to India on sanctions to be slapped on India for investing on Chabahar. So in that sense, yes, Chabahar's budget continues as last year, 100 crore. But we will see whether that money is being spent this year or what happens to those sanctions to be imposed if waivers are removed. I think the most interesting, you remember Prime Minister had visited Guyana, and the whole regional multilateral organization had a summit meeting with Indian Prime Minister. Indian Prime Minister went to Brazil, of course, for the G20 summit meeting. But interesting it is that the budget for Latin America has gone up from 30 to 60 crore, but looks much less compared to revised estimates of 90 crore. So Latin America is not receiving the attention that maybe it should have received, because we have to, go global in that sense. Indian Prime Minister, you remember earlier, a year before, had visited Papua New Guinea, and all the West South Pacific countries had come together and met him. Now, another area where we see is front-loading of India's culture. See, India's foreign policy is making sure that we project India's culture and diaspora. These are two important linkages. So this year, for example, 20 crore of the 2,000 crore for external, 20,000 crore budget, 1% of MEA's budget in that sense, is exclusively allocated to supporting cultural projects. India is also trying to open many new missions. You remember, in Southeast Asia, we are now also going to have a mission in the 11th country in the region. I know the capital is Delhi, but I'm trying to remember. Timor-Leste. We are opening a mission now there. So many new missions are being opened. And that budget is seeing about 9 to 10% increase. And of course, most interesting, Indians are now traveling around the world. So Passport Center's budget in MEA has witnessed a 50% increase. That means more and more people are going to be traveling to foreign countries for business, for pleasure, for whatever other reasons. And now look at this fact that this may be a small developmental partnerships related budget that India has, but this becomes increasingly more interesting because of the US aid under question now. United States Assistance for International Development, USAID, all their budgets have been put on a halt. A friend of mine was supposed to come to New Delhi on 20th February under that grant. And we were supposed to have a meeting here, and that has been now also put on pause. So that scholar is no longer able to visit India. I'm talking of a personal case that I know of. So US aid coming under question, likely to be, people even said, disbanded. US withdrawal from World Health Organization, Human Rights Council, Paris Climate Change Agreement, I think that will put much more focus on India's developmental aid now and India's developmental partnerships. And that would mean that we might see, why I'm making this point, we might see that the revised estimates, these are budgetary estimates. The revised estimates by the end of the financial year may see much more increase this year because anticipations from rising India are going to be very different. And now with the United States withdrawing, retreating, shrinking in terms of its indulgences around the world, we'll see anticipation, expectations from India going up. And I assume that you will see this year that budget estimates and revised estimates will have much larger gap than we have had usually earlier years. Of course, next Thursday, today is Thursday, next Thursday, you will see Indian Prime Minister meeting President Donald Trump. And we are all waiting to see what comes out of that meeting and how India looks at, taking more responsibilities around the world as United States bring to focus much more inward. With that, let me stop here, and I wish all of you very well for the follow-up discussion from here. And I enjoyed listening to every one of you. And thank you again to the IMPRi team for hosting such an interesting meeting with very, very erudite scholars. And I was delighted to meet all of them online at least, and hope to see each of you offline sometime. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Very, very clear and informative as always. Thank you so much for sharing your views. Before I invite Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, I would also like to announce all the attendees who are watching us here on Zoom and also on our social media channels. If you have any questions, you can start putting them on the chat box, or you can start thinking about it so that we can invite you later to ask the questions. So thank you very much again. And now I would like to invite Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya for her remarks. Thank you. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Simi. First, in fact, let me thank IMPRi for organizing this session, and also because two of my old friends are here, and friends have made through IMPRi, or rather contacts I've made through IMPRi, like Major General Chakravarti, whom I've heard earlier too. So, it was nice being here and listening to all of you. In fact, being the last speaker, much of what I have to say has already been said, especially by Swaran. And so it's going to be a kind of revamp. And in fact, let me put it the other way. I mean, a bit of twist in these asking certain questions. Basically, this is a very important topic because India's aspiration is not only Viksit Bharat, but this Viksit Bharat should be a player in the world stage. Of course, foreign policy and defense are very, very important. And I'm glad that you're putting them together because they are so interconnected. And I thank you for inviting me, Dr. Simi Mehta and Dr. Arjun Kumar especially. Now, of course, it need not be repeated here that we live in a very volatile world, and it's full of uncertainties. And basically, a single event can sometimes trigger off conflagrations, like we saw in Israel, a terrorist attack, which has led to, in fact, a couple of years of, basically destruction of Gaza and attacks on the West Bank, also against the Hezbollah. Also, to a certain extent, maybe it was connected to, Assad's fallout. So I'm finally leaving, all right, Syria. Also, realignments in the entire Maastricht area, falls to other provinces, has impacted India too, because before that, we are planning the I2, U2, things like that. Also, communications through basically the UAE and Iran and Israel. So all this has been affected. So basically, foreign policy has been affected, diplomacy has been affected. Although, and so far as defense is concerned, we also had problems, all right, with the Houthi. I mean, we have no problems with the Houthi, but they have been attacking Indian ships too. So therefore, basically, one international event somewhere else can, in fact, jeopardize well, India. So therefore, basically, defense and budget, as well as basically the allocations to the MEA, are very important because money, after all, drives global power. All right, and in fact, without a good budget, without basically enough provisions, it is very difficult for a country to become a major power. Um, so therefore, it is important to examine the budget in order to get an idea of how India is planning to meet its challenges globally and in its immediate neighborhood. Uh, I will basically briefly comment on the defense and MEA budgets because much has already been said, starting from, in fact, IMPRi itself, which has given a summary of the two budgets, and then we'll analyze the challenges of doing more with less. Because if you really compare it to other countries, our entire budget is not all that much, and our defense budget and foreign policy budget, MEA budgets, these are also not as much as that of the United States or basically China. And in fact, even Poland, of course, it doesn't spend that much in money, but it spends at least 5% of its GDP on defense, given the uncertainties of the emerging world with Ukraine. Now, it must be remembered that the budget theme this year, which was I pointed out right in the beginning, is Sabka Vikas, aiming, in fact, at Viksit Bharat by 2047. And here, of course, the priority is the domestic sector, emphasizing agriculture, employment, health, manufacturing, basically employment-led development, building rural prosperity, and all this within the well, kind of 50 lakh plus crore 2025 26 budget of which interest payments will take about 25%. So that leaves us not with much. So while defense and foreign policy are of utmost importance, well, domestic concerns are of even greater importance if we are, because without basically domestic growth, I mean, well, how can we achieve a Viksit Bharat, which will be a player in the world? A player, I'm saying, not a power yet, but even a player, okay? Now, the defense budget of 6.81 lakh crores is 9.52% more than the previous year's budget, but it is still only 1.9% of the projected GDP. When compared to the revised estimate for the previous year's 6.41 crores, the actual increase is actually only just 6%. On the other hand, the overall budget for the MEA is only 20,516 crores, lower than the 24-25 budget. Although, in fact, one must point out that so far, in fact, the allocation for the Exim Bank has not yet been included. It will be probably added later. The allocation of 20,516.61 crore is an increase of 15.5% over last year without allocation towards the Exim Bank. We basically cut that out. Yet the allocation to the MEA is only, well, much, much less than 1%, between 0.6%, 0.4%, and 0.6% of the total government expenditure. Now, India's stature in the world is growing, and money power, I repeat, always backs world power. This is the issue, therefore, is whether India's budget allocation is sufficient for India's aspirations in the global arena. Now, let me first focus on the defense budget, although, in fact, Major General Chakravarti has really given a very good breakdown of it and has pointed out the challenges that it faces. But basically, let me point out that the budget, if you really look at it, it tries to balance modernization, deterrence, and self-reliance. But India employs over 1.47 million active troops in armed forces, and there are a huge number of pensioners. The allocation for revenue expenditure, which includes salaries, allowances, and operational preparedness, which means you see long-term stay on naval ships as well as near the borders, this stands at 3,11,732.30 crores, or 45.76% of the total budget. Defense pensions take up 1,60,795 crores, which is over 23%. Now, this seems disproportionate when compared to the capital budget for modernization, including procurement of new fighter jets, drones, artillery guns, tanks, helicopters, which saw only a modest increase of 8,000 crores, that is from rupees 1.72 lakh crores to rupees 1.8 lakh, 80 lakh crores. However, the armed forces were unable to fully utilize, as has been pointed out by Annapurna Swaran and Major General Chakravarti. They could not utilize last year's capital budget, returning 13,000 crore to the government. The capital outlay allocation of 1,80,000 crores is below 5% of the defense budget. Out of this, 1,48,723 crores is planned to be spent on capital acquisition, while the remaining, that is only 31,277 crores, is for capital expenditure on research and development, R&D, and creation of infrastructural assets. I don't know if this is enough, especially given the kind of competition that we are facing in China and the United States, and of course in Europe. Now, trying to basically promote its Make in India policy, 75% of the modernization budget has been earmarked for procurement through domestic sector. 25% of the domestic sources will be procured from homegrown private industries. In absolute terms, this means that about 20,000 crores will be purchased from the private sector defense companies of India. Before critiquing any of this, let me also point out that 7,000 crores has been allocated to Border Roads Organization to help complete critical infrastructure like tunnels, etc. And also, there has been a 43% hike in the capital budget for the Indian Coast Guard. Given, in fact, the importance of the Indian Ocean in India's security, this is very necessary, especially in the context of what happened in Mumbai a few years back. So basically, the whole place has to be monitored. Now, having said this, let me ask whether the rhetoric of Make in India is realistic given current indigenous capacities. One must understand that the nature of warfare is changing from personnel intensive to technology intensive warfare, focusing on AI, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, space-based defense capabilities, and high-tech air warfare that includes AWACS, airborne warning and control systems, combat aircraft, mid-air refuelers, etc. The Indian Air Force faces critical deficiencies like an aging transport fleet, and in fact, it operates 32 squadrons against the requisite 42 squadron. But new acquisitions are costly, as has been pointed out. Let me just give an example that just 26 naval variant Rafale fighters cost 63,000 crores. The Indian Navy needs enlargement, and the Army needs to prepare for electronic warfare and needs modern surveillance equipment, among other things. But this is very important. Now, with threats on the India-China border, with China having a clear edge in roads, telecom, AI, hardened logistics installations that are vital to sustain high-intensity military campaigns in the future, the capital allocation and for R&D is perhaps not enough. India still remains one of the world's largest arms importers and has yet to make, in fact, things like jet engines. We are dependent on other countries for the purchase of jet engines. And basically, domestic production suffers serious capability gaps in critical technologies. More allocation is needed for training and for collaboration with foreign manufacturers to develop sixth-generation technologies, but that would cost at least 40,000 to 50,000 crores, according to defense experts. However, India aspires to be a great power abroad, and that requires increased defense spending on defense preparedness for next-generation wars. If we compare the defense allocations in the budgets of the of US, China, and India. This will become clear. The US basically gets $849.8 billion, that is $849.8 billion in military funding, which is actually 3.2% of its GDP. China's defense budget, in fact, what you showed in the beginning, it said something more, but the figures I got was about 1.5% of the GDP. But of course, China, you are never sure. The figures could be much higher. And basically, what we are overlooking also is that it uses dual use investments in civil military technologies. And so, therefore, in fact, that is not counted in the defense spending, but it's very much part of it. Okay, so it's kind of integrated there. Now, India's defense budget, and here again, my figures, and that is probably because of changes as Major General Chakraborty pointed out in basically the dollar exchange rate. The figure I got was $78.1 billion or 6.81 lakhs, which is of course a lakh crores, which is of course fixed. This is nothing compared to that of the US or China. But given India's financial capabilities, India has to optimize resources, prioritize innovations, and balance conventional and next generation warfare investments while cutting costs through multi-domain integrated operations and also bringing in funds through defense exports, which it's already doing by developing new R&D. What we need, of course, is new technologies, not just old technologies. If we want to interest, in fact, the high pair powers, all right, those who pay for our, all right. Now, so far as foreign policy is concerned, it is interlinked with defense policy, with diplomacy including not only peace, but defense preparedness and war. India's ambitions as a global leader, where it can be an influencer of global decisions making, basically it starts with its own neighborhood. All right, of course, we start at home. All right, whatever we do, we start at home, so it's its own neighborhood. And so it is not surprising that the MEA has prioritized its neighborhood first policy, India's neighborhood first policy, like the previous years, and has allocated 64% of its 5,483 crores aid for foreign countries to its neighbors, focusing in building large infrastructure projects like hydroelectric plants, power transition lines, housing, roads, bridges, and basically integrated checkpoints. Okay. Now, basically, Bhutan, as has been pointed out again and again, continues to be India's largest foreign aid recipient with 2,150 crores, followed by the Maldives, 600 crores. Nepal, of course, remains considered at 700 crores. Myanmar, 350 crores. Bangladesh, 120 crores. Now, the emphasis on Bhutan is not surprising, for it is very important to our defense, given its neighbor China, who would be very happy to have close relationships with Bhutan. India's investment, in fact, if we really look at what India is trying to do, investment is not just based on traditional ties, but it also is linking Bhutan closer to India. If you look at many of the organizations which have been being formed, there's, whether it's BIMSTEC or, not only BIMSTEC, there are these other ones which actually includes Bhutan. So linking Bhutan closer to India by helping build hydroelectric infrastructure and buying electricity from Bhutan, and basically military and other communication systems that tie it closer to India. The fact that there has been no increase in allocation to Nepal also is a reflection of India-China and Nepal-China relations. Bangladesh's allocation remains at 120 crores also. This is, one reason, of course, is that some projects have been completed, but also given the uncertainties in Bangladesh, it has probably not been increased this year. But what is a bit disappointing is the low increase of allocation to African nations from 200 crores to 225 crores. Also, basically, the allocation to Latin America, which was estimated to be around 90 crores, it is only now 60 crores. And basically, a static amount of 100 crores to the Chabahar port in Iran. The port needs to be completed, but given, of course, as Swaran Singh has pointed out, the uncertainties of the Trump administration, one is not sure when it's going to be completed, but it should be a priority. Uh, uh, Basically, so far as African nations are concerned, China has a major footprint there. But India, therefore, needs to basically promote its soft diplomacy, certainly over there, to gain influence. And if India wants to be a global power, or even a global South power, I mean, basically a leader of the global South or one of the leaders of the global South, it needs to basically, well, have good relations with Latin American countries. Now, this year's budget emphasizes economic diplomacy. The finance minister spoke of basically revamping the current model of bilateral investment treaty, the BIT, to make India more attractive to foreign investors. In the insurance sector, the government plans to allow overseas investors to fully own insurance companies, revising the FDI limit of 74%, but only on the condition that these companies should invest the entire premium in India. Now, this may be an obstacle, as are India's tax provisions. India is being sued currently by Volkswagen for demanding what it says are unfair, excessive taxes. Well, India is, of course, challenging it, but even Tesla has complained of high taxes. Now, as mentioned earlier, the MEA has received only 0.4% of the total budget. India's foreign policy ambitions are big, but the size of the foreign service remains static, and there is a disconnect between India's foreign policy ambitions and the current diplomatic infrastructure. It still has about 4,500 personnel and only around 1,000 IFS officers in its 200 missions. And the MEA needs basically significant reforms to cope with India's rising global profile. Before I end, I want to point to two developments in the international arena, one close to India, the other a bit far, but of course, both of them will have a major impact on foreign policy and its defense in the future. Now, one, of course, is the current developments in Bangladesh, which is a stark reminder that instability in relations will come suddenly. Uh, One cannot ignore threats to cut off the chicken neck, which actually connects us to the Northeast. So this will mean if anything happens, the Northeast will be, and we're talking about Act East policy. I mean, without the Northeast, basically, it makes sense, certainly, because we are still using sea routes. So the Northeast is very important to us. It's an integral part of India. Cannot have it cut off at all whatsoever. Now, why should we not ignore it? Because both Bangladesh and Nepal have good relations with China, and China's interests in the region are very well known. So both the MEA and the MOD need to prioritize this sector, one with its neighborhood first policy and the other with defense preparedness. Now, the other emerging dilemma is US President Trump's, who's been acting like what, a bull in a china shop. His policies may lead to tariff wars and cut down India's growth trajectory. Well, other speakers have been basically thinking about India as kind of stepping into, in case of, you see, if US AID is cut off and all that, into America's shoes, but we do not have the capacity to do anything like that. One of Trump's first decisions was to shut down the US AID. In the first 4 years, India has received about, in the last 4 years, it has received about $650 million from USAID under the Biden presidency. The freeze on USAID in the Trump regime is expected to have the greatest impact on healthcare projects, which receive 2/3 of the allocations from US with the aid that was made to India. Environmental programs received about $9.6 million in 2023, and governance, which included spending on civil society organizations and social infrastructure, received $14 million. So these will be, well, impacted slightly. It's a good thing that, in fact, India is now food secure to a large extent. And therefore, in fact, well, the allocation for food security was nil and this will not be impacted. Or for agriculture, a very minor amount was there, so that will not be impacted either. Now, the US AID freeze has been followed by the deportation of, many Indian nationals. In fact, initially they said 205, now they're saying 105. But as Dr. Major General Chakravarti pointed out, that this was via a military plane. Now, why a military plane? Uh, One wonders. Now, so basically, these are allegedly illegal migrants. And basically, India has claimed that they will take back illegal immigrants from any country as long as they're proven to be Indian nationals. Now, we do not want, even Pakistanis or Bangladesh dumped on us, and then we have to prove that they're not Indian nationals. Now, what is interesting is that the Pew Research data indicates that in 2022, 725,000 Indian nationals lived in the US as illegal immigrants. And if even half of these are deported, it may cause logistical problems and issues. So one has to look into that in the next year. Further, given Trump's announcement of trade tariffs on Canada and Mexico, two close allies and neighbors of the United States to basically implement, push through its own agenda. Uh, this indicates uncertainties of trade wars ahead, even though there has been a temporary pause in the in the tariffs against Mexico and China. But then it has gone ahead with tariffs on Mexico and Canada. It has gone ahead with basically tariffs on China. One doesn't know if it's, because as Swaran Singh was pointed out, India does import oil from Russia, and whether the waivers are going to be taken. So, and this is all going to basically increase prices and cause a lot of problems so far as the budget is concerned. And there will have to be revisions. But, again, there is a certain capacity that India has. Now, how India will negotiate these issues in the coming years is yet to be seen, especially given the global economic interdependencies. Tariffs on other countries will definitely also affect India. And here one must mention, of course, Trump's America First policy and the issue of H-1B visas, uh, which is a lifeline for Indian IT professionals. India's IT sector, one of the key is one of the key drivers of the country's economic growth. And this is heavily reliant on the ability to send skilled workers to the US under H-1B. Any cut down will spell a dip in revenue. And given the sector's contribution to GDP and employment, any disruption would be alarming since it would increase operational costs, reduce profits, and taxable income in India. Now, basically, I know that some of my uh, students and, in fact, relations, Netflix, for instance, has not renewed uh, uh, because they're so uncertain whether they would get H-1 reviews. They have not renewed contracts for some of their Indian or other foreign nationals who are working for them. And this probably will be followed by Amazon, etc. So basically, it's a bit, the whole thing is a bit uncertain. Now, Prime Minister Modi will be visiting, as we pointed out by Swaran Singh, on 12th February, visiting the United States and meeting President Trump. And one wonders what all are in the agenda and how things will work out. Now, they were friends earlier, all right? About Trump Sarkar, if you remember. They were friends earlier. They went on very well. But so far, um, because of BRICS, because India has been kind of cultivating, to certain moving closer to Russia. At least according to foreign experts, it's kind of consolidating its place in the global south and in other forums. Let's see how Trump looks at all that. Now, the defense and the MEA budgets, seen overall, seem to be on track. But when examined closely, one sees many gaps which should be carefully studied and filled by balancing allocations in a judicious manner. The world is full of uncertainties. It has always been, but today it seems to be even more so. And we have to get the maximum out of what has been allocated Remembering that India's population is now the largest in the world, and the primary focus, of course, is on the common man and his needs of health, education, employment, and security. So, just to end, balance is the name of the game. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhattacharya, for your very, very detailed analysis of the budget and its implications on the defense and foreign policy. As you said, ma'am, towards the end, that balance is the key. So, with this, I would like to ask a question to to Major General P.K. Chakravarti. As ma'am mentioned, balance is the key. In the defense budget, you see 80% of the budget is earmarked for, revenue expenditure and concerning salaries, pensions, operational costs, etc. And it is very less for capital expenditure. And here we are talking about all sorts of upgrades that we want, all sorts of technological advancements and, quantum and robotics and AI, etc., etc. So this is like always, this has always been so. So, it is like a vicious cycle of operational spending with only a fraction left for transformative growth. So what recommendations do you have to address such insufficiencies in capital outlay utilization, given the past history of India?
Well, your question is something which I've been asking myself right from the day I joined the armed forces and understood what the budget is. The point is, you have to pay your people, and don't forget that your people who man the armed forces, both civilian and those who belong to the combatant stream, and also, let's say in the defense budget, you have budget catering for civilian instructors in NDA, civilian instructors also. Unless they are also your capital expenditure. If that capital is not good enough, you can have the best of weapons and the best of technology. Still, you'll find that a superpower loses in Afghanistan, they lose in Vietnam against people who are really not capable. So first part is that. Secondly, how do you balance the revenue with the capital? Undoubtedly, you have to what you call come down to certain answers. And the first answer is that what you call you have to decide what are your priorities as far as the capital is concerned. Okay, now today you allotted the money. Let's know what is the what you call do wish list which is going to be spent on this capital. Nobody knows it. The second thing is as far as revenue is concerned, what are the works which are again there is a prioritization needed for that. We cannot reduce revenue because if you do that, then things will not be maintained. People are not paid, if roads are not maintained, if buildings are not made, how will you today have the armed forces, if the infrastructure is not made, survive? So therefore, this balancing definitely is required. We are all along trying to balance. As a matter of fact, that's why now capital budget has been given as a separate entity. We are trying our best. And often you'll see that capital remains unspent, as I brought out right in the beginning. Even if it is being unspent, we try our best that if we can move something to the revenue and spend it. Because revenue you can always spend. Revenue is something you can always spend, but you see the capital part of it is extremely difficult. It's highly procedural, highly what you call requires a lot of innovation, a lot of planning, and a lot of authorizations have to come in. All that we can do is the best we can do is that we can possibly formulate our both budgets in such a way that we can prioritize, well, if this is the thing, and plan on contingencies. Because you may plan on something and that thing turns out to be more costly. And then when it turns out to be more costly, then what do you do? So these are the things which are known as dynamic planning, which has to be enforced. That is the only way. I hope I've answered at least some bit of your question.
Yes, sir. Dynamic planning is definitely the key, and it actually applies to all the sectors for proper operation of and smooth operation of the whole system. So thank you very much for your response. Next, I would like to ask a question to Professor Annapurna. Ma'am, there has been a good allocation of money for disaster relief all over the world. And I would want to know your comments, because since you come from an environmentally, ecologically fragile state of Uttarakhand, and given the whole set of climatic changes that are occurring, and it also shares its frontiers with the China controlled Tibet. So I would want to know how important this is in terms of overall disaster relief, and um, what are your recommendations to further streamline things in this light?
It's a very good point, actually, because disaster is a real phenomena which we have been witnessing throughout Indian Himalayan region, and it's quite long and big. And most of the disasters are occurring in this region because of climate change, because India believes that there is a certain climate change. To which I will say that the US has withdrawn from Paris Pact, but India is committed to reverse the climate change. We are already witnessing 1.2 temperature higher than the other periods. So this is very important for the areas. Like if I talk about my area itself, we have seen examples of not only landslides, glacier retreating, and water scarcity, and also the compulsions of infrastructure like railways are being railway track is being constructed, and the roads are being widened. So this has a ripple effect on the people also, because sometimes we see that all roads are blocked and there is no access point. So this is not only going to affect the people of the area, but also the border areas, which are quite far off, and it's very difficult to reach to those border areas. So this is not only about Uttarakhand, but all through the Northeast, because that is a fragile region, and it is part of Indian Himalayan region. So this is very important that climate change should be given priority, because we have seen the cases of land subsidence in an area called Joshimath, where there was no strategy to stabilize the houses which were falling like a house of cards, and they just use rocks and the iron pillars to give support to the houses which were falling. And that was such a kind of idiotic thing, that this cannot stop the land subsistence. Rather, we have to think about the planning of infrastructure in a fragile area. What kind of structures can be made? Because we have ancient technologies also, and we have ancient knowledge also, which supports that the houses should be of light material, light structure, in view of the seismic activity also, and in view of the climate change, which is affecting everything. The rivers are drying. We are not getting sufficient water because of the glacier retreat. The glaciers are retreating in a very, very alarming rate. And it will affect the humanity, not only humanity, but also the aquatic life, like the fish and all other things. If I talk about Srinagar, we have seen that we had the indigenous fish. Maybe Sankta ji will be interested to know. But now the fish have gone. Why? Because there is a huge dam which has come up. So damming of rivers is also not a very good thing. You can plan dams which are of smaller capacity, but not of higher capacities. Like we have a Tiri Dam also. There are so many dams in Uttarakhand itself. We don't talk about Northeast, like there are other dams also. So Tiri Dam is such a huge dam that if something happens to that area, it will be creating massive disaster inside India itself. It will go up to Delhi. So this kind of situation is very alarming. And I think every country has to think about climate change and also about disaster preparedness, for which India is committed, and its foreign policy is also committed. And that's why in education also they have allocated a budget of 1.28650 crores. That is 6.21 higher than the previous budget. and it is for skill enhancement. And now skill is not only for manufacturing or for robotics or for cyber technology or for AI, but also for mitigation of climate related challenges. Because you have climate disaster, then you have to learn the mitigation strategies. For that also you need skills. So skills are very, very important. And if India wants to lead the global south, then India have to bring this to every nation, that we have to be prepared for any kind of crisis, because these crises are frequently happening. Even the advanced country like the US, we saw that the forest fire took a great toll on the California, Los Angeles. So in hill areas, every year we see the fires, forest fires, and these forest fires are happening because of the dry weather. So we have to understand the climate first, and then we have to think about the mitigation measures. And I think it requires enough budget, and that has been mentioned in the budget also, that for climate mitigation, climate for disaster management, India will work. So I think it will be helpful. And then again, connectivity and cooperation between the states is very important for meeting out any kind of challenge, not only of this disaster management or climate change, but for all other challenges, we have to have connectivity and cooperation. Because as I said, that whenever there is a rain, the connectivity is disrupted and the life of the people becomes very, very tough. So this is also very important. And Sayukta ji and someone else was also talking about Northeast. Northeast is part of India, Indian Himalayan region, but it is still quite far off. There is no development in terms of connectivity, quick connectivity. If you have to go to Assam, Silchar, or Tejpur, or Meghalaya, you have to take 1 or 2 flights. Like all the Indian Himalayan regions are also not well connected. So these needs to be connected, and I think the Udan scheme is working for that, and they are developing the unexplored destinations for tourist attraction, because the usual places have lost their carrying capacity. Like in Uttarakhand, Badrinath, Kedarnath, they have lost their carrying capacity. Now they don't have any kind of patience. So unexplored destinations will be very welcome, and this has been given weightage in the budget also. So thank you very much for your question.
Thank you. This
Yeah.
is because climate change affects all the countries of the world, and especially in a very closely knit Indian subcontinent. For example, a seismic activity in Afghanistan or even in Nepal, we have experienced how it affects the Indian landmass and our population. So definitely cooperation and connectivity and coordination among the countries is very, very important, as you have highlighted. Thank you very much for your comments, ma'am. I would like to ask there are a lot of intriguing and curious questions from my side, just as a student, your student. So, but nonetheless, I'll cut it short. I'd like to ask one final question to Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya. It was mentioned by Professor Swaran Singh about Maldives, reaching out to Maldives, and the thaw in the relationship that came in after he was invited for Prime Minister Modi's swearing-in ceremony, and also he was here last year in October, etc., etc. So and then we have increased the allocation to Maldives. So I want to understand from you that this allocation, that the damage was already done at that time, when even Muizu's ministers led a very bad social media campaign, etc. So does this increased allocation mean that India is genuinely interested in the betterment of bilateral ties, despite the bad press and the negative perceptions built around, or is there something deeper? Because we cannot match Chinese presence and Chinese influence in Maldives. So what is your take on this, ma'am? Ma'am, please unmute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Listening to your question, I forgot that it was muted. uh, uh, I mean, if you look at basically the allocation, the increased allocation, it's not really that much. It is
400 to 600 crores.
200 increase.
200 crores. Now, basically, and here I want to mention or bring in Annapurna, what you're saying, that it needs aid primarily also because of climate change and the effect it's having on Maldives or any of these ocean countries. Okay. I don't know exactly. I mean, that is one thing about this budget. It's not kind of clear on what uh, uh, items will basically this amount be spent on. So we cannot say whether we're trying to gain Maldives friendships by working on things that Maldives needs, or is it basically to counter the bad press and social media coverage that we got from at one point of time, which, as you said, basically is a slight thought. Uh, but China has a strong impact over there. The other thing, as I said, that India's resources are nothing comparable to China, which is much more. Whatever little we have, we are trying to balance. Okay. And if you really look at, Bhutan has got the most because primarily our interests there are vis-a-vis China are also pretty strong. Now, we cannot do the same thing with Nepal, which we would love to do, all right, I suppose. But Nepal has its own, I mean, the present government, okay, has its own mind. And uh, we saw what happened when a disaster struck Nepal. It sent, in fact, supplies back, the whole supply ship. In fact, I saw the supply ship taking off from Delhi airport. Didn't see it coming back, but I read about it. So, huge ship which came back. So basically, uh, yeah, it did not take help from India at that point of time. Bangladesh is also, one does not really look at it, but since my state is right next to Bangladesh, uh, Bangladesh is getting closer and closer to China, actually. Uh, so we must take that into Maldives is close to China. Uh, Sri Lanka is, but it has already suffered as a result of its closeness to China. So maybe you see an increase there also. You see an increase in the Maldives. Now, whether the combined thing is, it's actually just a swap. It's nothing much in terms of money. But maybe, in fact, we are thinking of countering China through building up good, cultural diplomacy, soft diplomacy, trying to put the money in where it is needed. Like, for instance, the effects of climate change in Maldives. I don't know exactly what this is meant for, the increase that has been there. Or for that matter, the same thing occurs to Sri Lanka, where this is going to be spent, on what is it going to be spent, all right? So, actually, we can leave this a bit open, but I personally think that China is at the bottom of India's increment. We do want Maldives as a friend. We want basically to have good relations with Maldives, with Sri Lanka. Neighborhood first policy kind of looks at that. It's a pity that some of our neighbors are not that forthcoming, and some of the, as I said, that relations can change overnight. We had good relations as long as Sheikh Hasina was there. But because of Sheikh Hasina and her coming to India, in fact, it's spoiled relations with Bangladesh. Okay, and so it can happen just overnight, and it can happen with Sri Lanka. It can happen with Maldives. Uh, so this is soft diplomacy. Increase it slightly, put it into the right place, and all right, see the outcome. If that answers your question.
Thank you. One line that even if you do so much with your neighbors, but due to their own biases, they will be leaning towards China only. So whatever you do, you cannot please everyone.
Absolutely.
That is true. Thank you so much. So, Major General, do you want to have the final thoughts? A minute.
Well, all that I would say, see, I'm going to say you have so chosen a beautiful subject because I'm writing a book exactly the way Professor Nautiyal and Professor Swaran is doing, and also Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya on strategic dependency, how India should become a leader of like-minded countries. And it's a grouping which is based on one word, military diplomacy. I'll just give you an example. The Chief of Army Staff spoke to the Chief of Army Staff of Bangladesh on 24th of November. Mind you, there was an official communication between the two, 24th November 2024, as stated by the Chief of Army Staff. Now, the military diplomacy is a very, very big thing which is happening. A military aircraft comes, lands at Amritsar. Now, when a military aircraft has to come, I hope you know that we have to give IB clearance, special IB clearance, no military aircraft. That's why possibly all US aircraft, they inform us at the last moment, and they normally have a stop at Guam. So it's the military diplomacy which has to work to prove these things. And this is a major thing which is relied by two countries, United States and China. Where now I was a defense attaché in one of the missions, so I can tell you that foreign policy, as all of you have correctly said, gets deeply related with defense. As a matter of fact, it's being often said that Trump wants to sell. He's a transactional person, a transactional leader who believes in transactions rather than in concepts and thoughts and what the previous person did. He probably, when Prime Minister Modi goes there, he's going to possibly put in that we should buy the F-35. One of the things, that is a fifth generation fighter we should buy from the US. At present, we have many aircraft from the US which are flying in India. But there is a possibility of this issue being big, that the US under Trump would like to sell more arms to India, rather than we banking on Russia or banking on France. You would like that thing to move to the United States. So definitely defense and foreign policy gets very, very deeply related. And the second thing which I would like to say, education is extremely important in today's world for the defense forces. Now, if you watch today, the National Defense Academy is a part of the Jawaharlal Nehru University. I'm just giving it to you. It started during my time because I couldn't get a degree from the JNU. But the point is that if you go to the United States today, the 5 military schools are all part of universities. We only talk of West Point, but I've just come back from the United States. 4 of the military schools are under the chancellors of the various universities. Many of them are public, some of them are private universities. So education gets deeply linked with the armed forces. And today's technology, you all spoke of AI, you spoke of all these things. I mean to say, with the technology has come into such a big instant, and also social sciences. It's not technology. Technology, along with social sciences, makes the armed forces a very important component of today's education system and the foreign policy. I still remember a postgraduate student from the University of Illinois coming to me, and I had written about Israel. So he said, do you think that the Indian Army, you all get time to think about Israel? So I told him the army is the last resort. If everything fails, we have to take over that thing and make it function. So we can't be away from education. We can't be away from what the nation is doing. Even today, if something goes wrong anywhere, the first thing you look towards are the armed forces. Can they get the electric problem resolved? As Professor Nautiyal very correctly said in Joshimath, when all these roads start, when you have so many earthquakes, houses splitting up, the first person who will be asked to respond, apart from the disaster management, is the armed forces. So therefore, goes without saying, all get linked. That's all I would say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Major General. Professor Nautiyal, would you like to have some concluding thoughts? A minute?
Yeah, surely one. I would like to show you this book. If you can see.
Yeah.
Indian Himalayan region towards a sustainable future.
Mm-hmm.
This is a new book which is ready for launch.
Mm-hmm.
It's a collaboration of at least 13 universities of Indian Himalayan region, and also Niti Aayog, and also G.V. Pant Institute of Himalayan Environment. So collaboration is the key. Cooperation is the key. And whatever is being done in the world politics, someday or maybe later on, maybe today we are finding that Donald Trump is acting alone. But you must see that what is happening inside the US also, like General Chakravarti said. The people are pushing back. So if you will not relent, people will start pushing back. The same is happening, the same will happen to India also. Like if we don't care about our population, our youth, like I told you about the budget of education, because we are into NEP, new education policy. And this NEP is about multiple things. It's not only about teaching, it is about learning, it is about practical learning, it is about multiple entry and exit, it is about flexibility, it is about inclusivity, it is about access, it is about affordability. So the government of India is equally concerned about this sector. And I think this sector is very, very important. And it is due to this sector, our technocrats and our educationists are in the US in the large number, not only in the US, but in Europe and other countries also. And they are our brand ambassador. They project a good image of India elsewhere. Forget about the illegal immigrants, because they are also desperate people and they also want to make good money, because the US is always said as a country with who will complete your dreams. So it is not completing your dreams, rather it is throwing you out. But even then people want to go there because it's a country of immigrants. So India will have to see all these logistics also. And I think we have a very good foreign minister this time. And he is a very thoughtful person. Recently, I also read his book, Why Bharat Matters. It's a beautifully written book. And he has also thought about the strategies which India can follow and how a foreign policy can become people's foreign policy. And I think this goal is going to be met by NEP also, because NEP is all about connection, involvement, and cooperation and collaboration. And as I said, that this book is also about a consortium, which is the consortium of Indian Central Himalayan Universities Consortium. So we have to also try, if our neighbors are not that so friendly because of the China factor, we can go elsewhere, like we can go to EU, and we are going and trade pact is with them, TTC. So this is also alternative which India is trying to search. So I don't think India has a very wise diplomacy, and India wants to show the world that how India can make a good contribution in the field of international relations as well as development inside India. The problems are immense. And if we start talking about the problems, then I'll ask the question that in which country we don't find problems? Problems are everywhere. Our problems are glorified because we are a democracy. So everyone has got the right to raise their voice and speak about the problems, but nobody gives the solution. We criticize, but we don't see what we are doing. So that's why NEP is a game changer. It can be a game changer, and it will be, as it is accessible, it is affordable, it is inclusive, and it also tries to make a person a fully grounded and rounded person. And skill is one of the most important part, which I think is very important, whether it's for armed forces, whether it's for educators, or for any discipline. So I am very hopeful that in this world of trade wars, tariff wars, India will steer clear and we'll have a very good future, but we'll have to definitely think about the counter strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And I congratulate you on the book. And I would also like to, suggest that we could have a online book discussion in the coming times once it's launched, or perhaps an online launch.
I'll be very happy.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am. We can discuss that
later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Release on 17th, and after that, if we can plan something, I'll be very happy to inform you about that, what has been contributed in this book and how this book came into effect. So
We'll be happy to have it. Thank you.
Connect only, we organized a discussion on G20 and sustainable developmental goals. So this is the outcome of that discussion. So I'll be very happy and thank you very much. So would you allow me to leave now?
Sure, ma'am. Sure. We'll just wind up in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Professor Bhattacharya, quickly your concluding thoughts.
Okay, since we're talking really about defense and foreign policy, um, and as I've said earlier also, we have a huge population of 1.4 billion almost, and we have limited resources. The amount that is meant for the entire budget actually is not all that much. When you compare it to that of China or India, China or USA, it's quite limited. Now they don't have that kind of well, USA certainly doesn't have that kind of population. China has almost, but China basically integrates various. As I said, they use dual use technology, and we really do not know how much they're spending on what. Because it's all they give out certain figures, but you know, uh, we are very clear. We have a budget which is published, and we know exactly what it is. So we know that there are limitations, all right, and there's nothing we can do about it because we have a limited GDP. From that, basically, we have to spend, and we have to pay also interest rates. You have to pay, you know, like the Rafale, these things you do not pay at one go. You pay it in installments, all right. So whenever you're building Chabahar, you're paying in installments. So it's a defense budget is always a bit funny because there's certain years when you need more and there are certain years when you need less. Okay, the same applies to the MEA, which basically the allocations, for instance, of Bangladesh. Now, MEA claims that certain projects are completed, so that is why it has come down. So that is also true, which is there. Now, what we need to do, in fact, as I said, balance is the key, but integration is another key. All right, integrate the budget in such a way that well, you have the defense budget, you have the foreign policy budget, and these two should be connected also with what? Finance, the finance ministry, because, well, finance ministry is very much involved, all right, when it comes to tariffs and stuff like that. Okay, so there has to be kind of a multi-domain integration, all right, as such, to balance the budget best. That's what I find. Okay, uh, because we have to. There's nothing we can do. Increase the budget. There's more we need. Well, where will it come from? I mean, look at your domestic budget. There is a set salary and you have to spend within that. So here we have a set budget and we have to spend within that. How can we make the best use of it? Okay, in a husband, you can have a two-earner family and you can basically, use the incomes of the two in a judicious manner. And also, you can judiciously use or bring in the finance ministry, the defense ministry, the external affairs ministry, and other ministries also, okay, so that you can integrate and balance for the maximum advantage of the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you to everybody. And to just conclude, we have had a very informative, enriching, and excellent panel discussion today. And we are so proud that and privileged that we have had the opportunity to host today's discussion. And with the most erudite scholars, observers, and practitioners in the field. So thank you very much. So in conclusion, what I get is that this budget actually does indicate India's long-term intent, but we do need to cater to the real challenge of its effective execution. And we have to have the budgetary readiness for the long-term resilience of India, and also to solidly establish India's credibility as well as our geopolitical footprints and aspirations around the world. So with this, thank you very much. And I would like to just formally invite Reet for the formal vote of thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So, as we come to an end of today's discussion, I, Reet Lath, researcher at IMPRi, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks. On behalf of IMPRi, Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, I would like to thank all of you for attending today's deliberation, a panel discussion on defense, foreign policy, and union budget 2025-26. We are grateful to our chair for the session, Dr. Simi Mehta ji, our esteemed panelists, Professor Sanchukta Bhattacharya ji, Major General Dr. P.K. Chakravarti ji, Professor Swaram Singh ji, Professor Prabhir Deb ji, Professor Annapurna Nautiyal ji, Professor Naval K. Paswan ji, for taking part in discussion and enlightening us. We thank all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, or listening to us on our various podcasts, or reading our publications. We look forward to welcoming you for our next budget deliberation today at 6:30 p.m. for the Environment and Union Budget 2025-26. You may also find more thematic events and book discussions under the IMPRi Web Policy Talk series. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRi Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Nautiyal.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We look forward to learning more from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.